serious, what's something you wish you never saw? A shoebox of Polaroids of my dad sharing my mother. The neighbor's dog dead in the middle of the road. She was a little rat terrier named Penny, and every day after work I would come home and she would wait for me by my driveway. She always waited so she could play with my dog. I would let him out and they would play so well together. She had free reign at my house, could come in and would hang out watching TV with me a lot. We were moving and it was the last load. Last time I would see her. As I went out to call for her to say goodbye, I looked down the street and I saw her laying in the road. The garbage truck had hit her and it was a bad scene. I still think about her often. That's been 11 years ago. My 10-year-old nephew in his little coffin, without any hair, ripped me to shreds. When I was 9, I stayed with my grandparents in a different country for a school term, about 2 months. The house had a cellar that housed my grandfather's work tools and benches as well as a fridge. I went into the cellar to get a drink and saw my grandfather on a chair with his head thrown back and eyes closed. He was getting sucked off by the suction tube that cleans up sawdust. I didn't know what he was doing at the time and kinda stared trying to figure it out. He saw me and instantly stopped and I ran away, and I remember telling my grandmother about it in a jokey way because I thought it was funny. I think back to that and cringe. My mother's dead body. When I got the call late at night and drove to the retirement home, the employees there acted like it was expected of me. Like of course I gotta go down in the basement and look at her one last time. So I went along with it. My dad later asked me what in the world I was thinking. And I don't know. I'd much rather have remembered her the way she was when she was alive. But now all I see is a dead grimace full of agony. I'm fortunate from what I've seen is just stuff on the internet. I worked security in an emergency ward, but I didn't actually see much of anything in the way of gore. I just see the gunny on the way in. The worst experience I had though was what I smelled. I was coming back from the cafeteria and on my way to emergency there was a very strong smell of pork barbecue. My first thought was some asshole brought a hibachi into the waiting room and is cooking their dinner. Which, in my defense, would not be much of a stretch with all the other strange shit that happened there all the time. Turns out there was an apartment fire and we had half a dozen serious burn victims come in. That's when I found out burnt human flesh smells like pork barbecue. I'm a midwife. We don't always look after mums with happy endings. I do a lot of bereavement work. We don't get support for this, even with the really tough cases. It's just part of the job as far as management are concerned. I often go to the store cupboard and have a little cry to myself. I talk to the babies. I use their names. They deserve to have them spoken. My dad naked, but I'll keep doing it to care for him while he recovers from his heart surgery. Really weird to try to clean someone in one of those shower chairs BTW. Honestly, maggots crawling out of a man's trash tube. 1. Most horrendous smell ever. 2. Maggots make me uncomfortable. And to see them coming out of a living man's throat and seeing them and black sludge go flying across the room when he coughed was just, needless to say, I noped out of there hella fast. My dad fallen on the floor, half paralyzed, barely able to talk, calling me. He was drowning in his own vomit. He died a few hours later. It hasn't even been a month since he died, but this picture of him collapsed on the floor calling me for help while barely being able to speak will haunt me for the rest of my life. 2 little girls getting run over by an 18-wheeler right in front of me when I was 16. The girls were playing on a bicycle in a park near the street. They were trying to go around the park riding the same bike. One of them pedaling and the other one moving the handlebars. I was walking on the sidewalk towards the park. When I was about 10 meters away from the girls, they lost control of the bike, went towards the street, tripped and fell under the trailer, right in front of the last set of wheels. They were completely crushed by the truck, blood and bits everywhere. The driver stopped and literally fell on his knees crying as soon as he saw what happened. The girl's mom lost it, crying uncontrollably, screaming and pulling her hair. An angry mob started to form and beat the driver. The guy was screaming, "Please kill me. I deserve to die." But a woman who was with the mother saved him from the mob and started to comfort him, telling him it wasn't his fault. I was shocked, frozen in place watching all this happen around me until I snapped out of it and ran home. It was a horrifying accident. Gave me nightmares for weeks. My neighbor's beautiful collie got hit head on by a vehicle speeding through the neighborhood. The guy just grinned and sped off, leaving her dead in the road. It broke my heart to pull her off to the side. The worst, since I was only a kid at the time, was having to tell our neighbor what had happened, as we both loved that sweet dog. Remains of a person who was burnt alive. Few years back I saw a video of a young woman ascending an escalator with a toddler. At the top the floor breaks beneath her and she falls in. Has just enough time to hold the kid out of harm's way and then gets chewed up into the machinery. You can hear the bones of her legs breaking. I was ducked up by that for ages. Still can't bring myself to get onto an escalator. I hope her kid is doing okay. Hopefully too young to remember. I'm not gonna go find that video to link it, and I strongly advise you to not go looking for it. Arna soldiers step on a IED. Also the body of a close friend after an accidental overdose. And the list goes on. A few years ago I saw a video where someone filmed themselves shooting a reporter cameraman and posted it to Live a Leak or something. I still remember the woman's shirt flicking as it interacted with the bullets. Really scary stuff. A young boy was hit by a car in my cul-de-sac a few years ago. I didn't see it but ran to help when I heard his mother screaming. I had first aid but it was clear I couldn't do anything. He died at the hospital later. Wish I never saw it because the memories of the sights and sounds are ridiculously clear still. Makes me really appreciate EMTs and emergency room nurses and doctors who have to deal with tragedy on a daily basis. I spent a few months in prison a few years back. And in the gym I befriended a guy from the same corridor as me. Eventually we were smoking cigs, drinking coffee in his cell. When I asked, "What put you here?" which is something you should generally never ask anybody inside the rock, because the joke is that everybody is innocent. But by that time we were already pretty good buddies, so he did not mind. So he says, "There's my folder behind you on the shelf. Take a look." I wish I did not. In these police files, evidence files that were in the folder, there were very graphic pictures. Worse than you can ever see in a horror film. Some guy had owed him some money for some meth. He had gone to his house, tied him up onto a chair with duct tape in the middle of the kitchen floor, then carved his head open from ear to ear, take the top of the skull off and spoon out the brains. Some questions are better left unasked. I was at the library. We heard the fire engine noise outside. Naturally, the other kids and I go outside and look. There's blood everywhere on the ground and a guy's head is hanging off his neck. It's not completely detached from the body, but the neck and spine are broken, so it's hanging lifelessly. Getting hit by car. You ever just feel like time stops and you say, "Yeah, this is the end. Welp, lived a good life, I think." Scarier if the car is being professionally piloted by a drunk Karen telling Emmy to watch the road while I was ducking dying. I thought that she would never call the ambulance and I would have died while she was yelling at me. The only reason I lived is because there was this one absolute saint walking on the other side of the road. If he wasn't there, pretty sure the women would have never called the police and I would have died. She got sued, of course. I also somehow lived without major injuries. So good ending. Saw my grandpa's balls. After my grandma died I spent a week over there to keep him company. He was napping and I went in to see if he wanted to go get dinner. He was lying on his side wearing just a t-shirt. It was a long shirt but his balls were longer. I was 15. I am 38 and can still see them perfectly in my mind. Honestly, my dad crying. Not because men shouldn't cry or some bullet. Just seeing him cry. I was on a family member's boat when I saw a kid tubing from his family's boat get hit and killed by another boat. The dad was tearing his hair out and the whole family was screaming. My uncle told us to look away but I'll never forget how horrible it was. Unfortunately, a cartel beheading. I did 12 years in a high-tech crime unit, mainly child abuse material. For 10 years I was okay. It wasn't pleasant but I didn't think about it after I left work. Then one evening I was alone doing some overtime on a rush job and found a movie of our offender raping a toddler who looked very much like my daughter did at the time. I haven't been able to forget that one. Horrible. But I think the detectives who had to tell the child's mother what had happened had a harder job. There's a mountain man who lives near my family cabin. He is an interesting man. Full tin hat kinda dude. Also, not fond of clothes. One time he came into our yard to offer us some cabbage he'd grown and did not bother to put on a scrap of clothing beforehand. Seared into my retinas forever. While looking behind me while running up the basement stairs at night, an inconveniently placed straw man decoration was right there. The final snapshot, and there's something wrong with Aunt Diane. Dead bodies littered around me in horrible, contorted positions amongst piles of rubble and uprooted trees. The 26th of December 2004. I was only 8 years old. Still have nightmares sometimes. Encyclopedia Dramatica. Back in the 2000s, there was a website that started with the warning that only true heroes could get to the end of the page. The next image was a baby deer licking a baby bunny on a lush green field. Then another of the deer and bunny. Then the page loaded all the way and the scroll bar got longer and longer. A gif of a woman in high heels crushing a live kitten till its brains squirted out. Burned bodies. A gif slaughterhouse security camera showing a hog having its head cut off with a chainsaw and the headless body running around. Mutilation. Gore. Animal torture. Dead children. Scat play. Hundreds of ever worsening images and gifs. I never made it to the bottom but had nightmares afterwards and was generally uneasy around strangers for a while. My brother being taken out of my house in handcuffs. A picture of a rhino left for dead after its horn was cut off with a chainsaw. The depths of human cruelty knows no bounds. An ex-friend of mine took genuine pleasure in feeding a live rat to his pet snake, and just found it hilarious watching the rat die. For the record, I understand the snake's got to eat, but my friend's reaction to it, I'll never forget. He said stuff like, "Oh, you want to get out? Just shut the duck up and let my snake eat you." He expected me to find it funny, but I was just horrified. Maybe 10 or 12 years ago, late night driving back home, I saw something weird spread on the right lane of the highway. It was like jam with chunks on it, but a lot. It was flesh. Someone had been run over and dragged by presumably a large truck. The end of the spread, there was a body with only head, torso, one arm and like half a leg, or it looked like that. In the early days of the internet, a friend sent me a link with what appeared to be my first name and the URL. I thought, how nice. An e-birthday card. Wrong. I clicked into it. Turned out it was someone else's collection of dead body images. Bodies impaled upright on giant sticks. Bodies smashed apart where the outside and insides and mixed up. A full head crushed inward concaved. That's the day I stopped talking to this friend. Edit. Spelling. A cop I once knew thought it would be funny to show me a picture of some guy that shot in the head by an AK from one of his crime scenes. The image of the man's eyes half rolled up into his head, mouth wide open, and his now liquefied brains all splattered all over the sidewalk are forever burned into my mind. I never spoke to that cop again after that. I grew up on a small farm. When I was visiting home from college, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of dogs fighting. I ran and woke my mom and dad up, thinking maybe a coyote had gotten into the yard and was attacking our herd dog. My dad grabbed his gun and we ran outside to find 3 very angry pit bulls attacking our goats and chickens. One dog had our herd dog by the throat and my dad shot it, which obviously got the attention of the other dogs who started running at him. My dad shot them too. There are laws in my state that allow for firearms to be used to defend farms and protect livestock. Then, with the chaos subsided, we finally took in the damage. The dogs had killed about 10 of our chickens, and feathers covered the ground. The worst part was that our oldest doe and our billy goat had both been completely ripped to shreds. I will never be able to unsee the exposed trachea of a goat I had bottle fed from birth. There was so much blood. It was one of the worst nights of my life just because it was so painful to see so much destruction. My mom giving my stepdad a blowjob. That was both awkward and terrifying. When I was in high school we had an assembly to discourage drinking and driving. They used photos of crash scenes, people decapitated, ran through by branches, crushed by trees, while playing the song Let the Bodies Hit the Floor by Drowning Pool. Really distasteful stuff. Come to find out, The people in these photos didn't necessarily die from drinking and driving. They were all taken from our county sheriff. The photo included the dead body of a classmate's family member. His accident had been caused by slipping on the ice. I was pretty distraught and told my parents about it. They didn't take it seriously or else didn't believe me. Not sure if there was ever any fallout from that assembly. But the older I get, the more angry it makes me. This will probably get buried. But I found my dad when he hung himself. The image is burned in my head and I can't see any images or any movies referencing people getting hung because it triggers that horrible scene. Something I am glad I deliberately avoided seeing: the jumpers at WTC on 9/11. While evacuating the area, I passed within a couple of blocks and people were on the corners, where there was a view of the burning towers, and screaming as people jumped. I realized what was happening and kept my eyes ahead and down. Had seen the second plane hit. That was more than enough. My grand's body. She died of old age after spending years in chronic, severe pain. Her body was emaciated, down to under 5 stone, under 70 lbs, and it was so twisted. Her mouth was wide open and it looked like she was silently screaming. She'd wanted to die for a long time but obviously couldn't. She had to refuse antibiotics for a chest infection in order to finally pass on. It was tragic and still haunts me. It also helped me make my mind up on the topic of euthanasia. My dad dying. He had motor neurons disease for a short time. The day it happened, 30th of April this year, I got a call from my stepmom's cousin saying I better come see my dad fast. I could tell by his voice that this was probably it. I ran to his as fast as I possibly could. He only lived about 5-10 minutes away. Just as I reached the door, my brother's girlfriend came out and said he had gone. I ran in and he was making a sound like he was gasping for air, and every time he did it his body would sit up a little and his arms would flail a little bit. I see this every time I try to sleep. I wish I had been just a bit later, to be honest. CP. From helping run a pornography server to just casually scrolling through Reddit or Instagram. Out in the open. Worse was Instagram. With Discord I could go ahead and get reports done quickly. Reddit moderators would respond quickly too, but Instagram? I tried reporting a few posts and one account several times but they found nothing wrong with the content. I've studied crime scene photos of abuse victims. Photos of charred corpses. Read about cold cases. Studied homicide and more, but none of those in my experience will ever compare to CP. The corpse of my cat after she had passed. I expected her eyes to close as vet put her to sleep, but they stayed open and kept opening despite my closing them. So, I just kissed her forehead and held her to my chest and sobbed. This was in January. I miss her still so much and I'm still upset. She was only 6 years old. In this thread, links I'm afraid to click on. Saw little girl go through a windshield with a front row seat. DOA. It's the reason I carry a trauma kit with me and am in school to become a trauma nurse. The beheading of Nick Berg. Had nightmares 4 weeks afterwards. A video I came across of a man being decapitated, and naked photos of my dad. Equally bad for me. My father murdered my stepmom's unborn child. I have only told this story one other time to my therapist. I watched my father kick the it out of my stepmother's pregnant belly. I was about 8 and this was her 3rd pregnancy attempt with my dad. I don't know how far along she was. They didn't know the gender at that point, so not too far I assume. They were laying down sideways on my bed, installing an AC unit into my window that sat perfectly above my mattress. My stepmom didn't do something right in my dad's eyes and this was how he punished her. I watched my father kick my stepmom's stomach until she threw up. My dad had joint custody, so we only saw him every other weekend, but after this incident, I didn't see my father for another 2 months. Nothing has ever been said about this incident and I doubt anything ever will be said. I believe this to be murder, which really challenges my pro-choice opinions. I was here scrolling on Reddit and a video of someone pooping with a prolapsed anus came up, and I couldn't look away, but it is the single worst thing I've ever seen in my life. Porn. I started watching it when I was 7 years old and it has made things in my intimate life very difficult. I'm still struggling to stop watching it because I feel like I need it. My brother. walking into my room and slitting his wrists. My ex-boyfriend's face when he was trying to kill me. His eyes were so dead. I was shown one of those live leak type videos, when I was much younger, of a man being held down and shouting for them to let him go. Then they suddenly stab him and cut his throat open. It was, rough. I seen a few deaths growing up, by the one I want gone is when I was sitting by the window in debate class goofing off with my female friend. About 8 feet outside next to a tree were 3 kids, about 14. Car flies down the street. We look up. Outside the kids look up. Car goes over curb. High schooler heads out of car and shoots the 14-year-old on the left. Kid just drops. Other 2 are shot as guy gets back in car and they take off. And then we hit the ground and duck. It wasn't the most gruesome death I witnessed, but just the way he fell like a marionette with strings cut. My mother's last breaths, cancer sucks, and watching it destroy everything about her and being completely unprepared for it. My father had no idea what to do, and up until the funeral thought God may bring her back. It was the event that marked the moment my immediate family began dissolving. It overshadows a lot of the good memories of her and unfortunately is the first to pop into my head when I think of her. Second worst, watching a cat get hit by a car, too far away to intervene beyond yelling, and then seeing the owner coming out, ripping it off the road and trying to drive to the vets covered in blood. Third, watching my brother-in-law, too drunk to even understand what was going on around his alcoholic ass, slur and yell at a family dinner. My kids haven't seen him since and he refuses help. Can't legally force him to get it either. He suffers visual and auditory hallucinations and experiences bouts of memory loss, but still insists on driving. Bad enough that he has called the police that punks were drinking beers in his backyard and vomited on the chairs and left a mess. He could not account for his afternoon, but all the cans left were the brand he prefers and empty Clamato bottles, his chaser of choice. A guy ramming a glass jar in his arsehole which then breaks. Dead cat on the road right next to the sidewalk I walked on. Guts was all over the place and yeah, it was very disgusting. I witnessed a bicyclist lose it and drop into traffic. Moving truck for some company in the area hit him at speed. The bicyclist very clearly didn't survive impact.